Welcome to the officially unofficial podcast of On Call. I'm Clay Cranford, a retired sergeant from the Orange County Sheriff's Department in California and a police officer from the Irvine Police Department. And my co-host, Omar Martinez, a former lieutenant from Long Beach Police Department. By the way, the police department depicted On Call. So Omar obviously will be able to provide some interesting insights, having spent his law enforcement career in Long Beach. How you doing, Omar?
Good. Great to be here.
All right. So, Omar, why don't you let everybody watching the podcast kind of know what's your background and the kind of things that you did at Long Beach?
So I retired almost 27 years at Long Beach. I worked a variety of assignments. Obviously, when you first start with the police department, you work in patrol, like it's depicted in On Call. And I also worked as a field training officer. One of my main focuses during my career was training. So I worked in a variety of assignments, conducting and putting on training, both at the basic academy level, which is the brand new police officers, and also those that currently work doing the job. They call it advanced officer training. And I also work detectives. And as I continued to, work through my career, I promoted to a supervisory position, a sergeant, and then later promoted to lieutenant. And you'll see a couple of those ranks depicted in the on call. You see both a sergeant and a lieutenant in the episodes, during the series. And then once I retired, there was a couple other assignments I did, but one of the assignments too was uh, not only the retired as a lieutenant, but there was a city college in the city, and I also worked providing law enforcement service for the city college within the city. And then I retired.
Yeah, and now we're happily retired. So I only did 20 years. I started out with Irvine Police Department. I went through they put me through the police academy. I was a patrol officer in the city of Irvine, California. For about 4 years, I then lateral kind of quasi transferred to Orange County Sheriff's Department here also in California. And then as a deputy sheriff, it's a little different than a police department. You start out in the jail, and then after some time, you get to go out to patrol. And the sheriff's department has quite a few cities that are very different. So I mean, we have beachside cities, Dana Point, San Clemente, and then we also have kind of inner city type of feel cities like Stanton, which is probably with regards to kind of the crime and stuff, probably closer to Long Beach, but not by the ocean. And then we also have like Rancho Santa Margarita. That's a city that I patrolled in, which is kind of more like Irvine, kind of upper middle class bedroom community. I was also a training officer, like one of the characters in the show, and in that relationship with your trainee in the patrol car. So we're actually obviously going to be talking about that because that's kind of central to this whole show, and actually a lot of movies, Boys in the Hood, things like that, show that relationship. The seasoned training officer and the brand new rookie. I worked as a school resource officer. I worked as a juvenile detective on our threat assessment team, so did some different things in plain clothes. And then as a sergeant, I worked in our jails as well as a supervisor. And then and about 3 years ago, retired as a sergeant from the Orange County Sheriff's Department. So this podcast is going to be, I mean, a lot like podcasts where we're going to run down the show. We're going to kind of break down the scenes and talk about them, but we're going to be giving you our perspectives as former law enforcement officers. Sometimes I'm sure when you're watching this, if you're not law enforcement and you're watching these police procedural dramas, you're wondering, is this how it is, this the way it is? Is this the way it works? So we're going to give you our perspectives on that, share our stories, which, when Omar and I were talking about doing this podcast, we have personal stories that in some ways are very similar to the things happening in the show. So we'll share those things and give you our take on this show, which I've so far, I think is a great show. It's coming from, Dick Wolf, who did Law and Order, which was a show that I think we all kind of grew up with. It's been around
Mhm.
forever. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the show. So On Call is produced by Dick Wolf, the Law and Order franchise, the Chong Chong shows. His son Elliot Wolf is one of the executive producers. There's Ben Watkins, who's the showrunner, And the executive producer on the series, the showrunner, is the person who's kind of the day-to-day producer of the show. So that person is often very, very important. Ben Watkins also produced and wrote Cross, which is also on Amazon. It's a current show out there. I haven't seen that one yet, but it's out there. I think it's also kind of a police detective procedural show. Burn Notice, which was in 2007, and one I've never heard of before, which was Quest to Ref in 2002. Have you heard of any of those,
Yeah, I
Omar?
have. I've heard of Burn Notice, Cross. Cross was actually, I think, I don't know if it was a book or a movie before, but I know there was a movie or a couple movies back in the day. I think it was Morgan Freeman was in those
Yeah,
movies.
Morgan Freeman played Cross, the main character in the book series. That's right.
Mhm.
And they made was yeah, so they did make that one movie where he's hunting down a serial killer.
Yes, like, I like one is across country or something, he's gotta go to California or, hunt him
Right.
down. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody that I recognized right away when I started watching the show was Eric LaSalle, who was one of the doctors in ER,
Mhm.
and he's starring in this as Sergeant Lasman, but he also has done a lot of work behind the camera. So he actually directed a lot of ER episodes, which I didn't wasn't aware of, but he directed On Call's episodes 1, 2, 5, and 6. We'll be seeing him regularly as Sergeant Lasman. Lori Loughlin, who played Aunt Becky in the series Full House, she's in the series as the no nonsense Lieutenant Bishop, who I when I first saw him, like, oh, I know who this is. I couldn't quite put it, but she looks so different. And she's smoking cigarettes and dropping f bombs. So it kind of cracked me up that that was Aunt Becky. The series stars are, hopefully I say this right, Troyan Belisario, who plays the training officer Tracy Harmon, and Brandon Larquente, who plays the rookie, fresh out of the academy, Officer Alex Diaz. And other note, Tron's Belisario's parents are producers, Deborah Pratt and Donald Belisario. That name, actually, when I heard Belisario, I'm like, that sounds familiar. Her father created Magnum PI, Quantum Leap, NCIS. So he's a hitter in the world of television shows. And I remember Magnum PI. That was like one of my favorite shows growing up. Her breakout role was playing Spencer Hastings in the teen drama Pretty Little Liars. That show ran 2010 to 2017. And Brandon Larquente is best known for his roles in Bloodline, 13 Reasons Why, which was a teen show. I think they've done 2 seasons of it. I actually didn't watch it, but it was at the time when it came out, there was a lot of people talking about it because it was about a teen who commits suicide, actually. So there was a lot of discussion at the schools about that. And I think it came out when I was a school resource officer. And then also in the series Party of 5. And I remember watching that when it was out many, many, many years ago. I do not remember his role. He must have been a little kid in it. In 2022, he had a recurring role in the 6th season of the medical drama series The Good Doctor, another show I have not seen. So anyway, but so far, I mean, I'm really kind of pleased by, everybody in the show right off the bat. Nobody on a very basic level, all the characters I find interesting. How about you, Omar?
I do. As far as the interaction between some of the characters, I mean, I was even looking at, like, the portrayal of the police equipment and the vehicles, and we'll talk about the locations here in a second, but, yeah, all of it had a real authentic feel to it, at least for me looking at it from working in the city.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think on a very technical level, the whoever was their advisor on this, I think did a good job of making it pretty realistic. There are little things that they did that made me go, "Oh, yeah, like, that's how we do it." Just little things. So there's something that probably the average person's not gonna pick up, but I appreciated that. Okay, so let's break down the episode, and we'll kinda go by scene. For anybody watching this, just know that we're gonna be talking about all the all the things happening in this episode, so there's gonna be lots of spoilers. So if you've not watched the first episode of season 1, maybe you should stop this podcast, go watch it, come back. Or if you wanna watch it after kind of knowing some of these things, you actually might pick up and catch things that we're talking about. So that might be good too. I don't know. It depends on what you like to be spoiled or not. I don't know. We'll
Yeah.
see. All right.
Yeah.
So let's go with scene 1. The show opens with Officer Maria Delgado, and she's conducting a traffic stop on a suspicious vehicle with expired tags. And as she approaches the car, she immediately identifies the driver as Juan Cortez with some guy sitting in the back seat. Later, we find out his name is Eddie Maniac Watson, and she doesn't recognize. There's somebody in the front passenger seat. It's an unconscious young girl. She doesn't recognize her, and prompting her to order everyone out of the vehicle. Tensions escalate as the men in the vehicle become combative. And just as Delgado moves to call for backup, Maniac shoots her in the neck and the car speeds away. So let's start with there were some establishing shots in the very beginning of this to kind of show you that they're in Long Beach.
Mhm.
So what did you think, Omar, about just kind of the look and the feel? Did it feel like they're I mean, obviously they're showing you things like the Queen Mary and things like that, but what did you feel how did you feel about, like, the way they set it up and did you feel like we were in Long Beach?
Yeah, they definitely did a good job of kinda giving you an overall feel, like you said, the Queen Mary historical ship. They had a, picture of that, and part of the opening. I think it was part of the opening, of the episode. The port is a big deal in Long Beach, and they showed some of the port with the containers, and there's a lot of things going on in Long Beach, and the port contributes to a lot of that. And then, of course, they got a glimpse there of the new city hall. Not too many years back, the whole city hall area was revamped. There used to be the court building there, and all that was redone and upgraded, so to speak. And so you got a little glimpse of that as they're driving around in the patrol car. So you definitely got a good feel for the city. And there was even some streets, like even when I'm watching other movies sometimes, and I'll see a street, and you would think, no one's even going to recognize that street. But when you work in the city, you drive around the same places, over and over again, and you'll see a street, and you're like, hey, that street looks familiar. And a lot of times it's filmed in Long Beach. They do a lot of commercials and other productions in Long Beach as a backdrop, and sometimes just as another place, but they're using the city to film it.
Mm. Yeah, because you have the beach and you have parts of the city that are kinda grittier, so it's an
Yeah.
interesting city, actually. I know a few guys who worked for Long Beach, and they said it was a fun place to work. There was a lot going on, and, if you were a proactive patrol
Mhm.
officer, yeah, there's quite a bit of stuff to keep you occupied during your shift.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of activity. There's basically 4 areas within the city. I think in the series, they depict it as kind of a West Long Beach area, when they're talking about where they're doing some of the police work. But, you can go to certain parts and it's gonna be busier and there's gonna be more activity, and you can go to other places, other parts of the city where there's gonna be a little bit less, and it's gonna be kinda different kinds of law enforcement, that you're gonna be doing in other parts of the city. But, it has, like I said, it has the port, you have great restaurants, hotels, the convention center. So you'll get protests down there. They've got a major university in the city. So and they have their own police department, so you're working with them. There's a lot of things going on in Long Beach. So definitely things will keep you busy.
Yeah, well, it's a good city for them to use then for the show. And I like that they did that because there's so many shows that, it's LAPD and that kind of thing. So I'm glad that they're not doing it in LA and they're doing it in a different city and maybe a city that a lot of people outside of Southern California aren't even aware of. So that's cool. Okay, so let's talk about this opening scene with Officer Delgado making this car stop. Very common to pull a car over for expired tags. That's kind of the reason for the stop. But I'm sure she wasn't pulling them over because they had expired tags. She's looking at the people in the car and she's thinking, okay, these are some individuals perhaps I need to talk to. What do you so I mean, I'm sure when you're watching this, Omar, were your spidey senses going off? Like everything about this, obviously they're setting it up for something horrible to happen, but
Yeah,
when
well,
you were watching her pulling this person over, She's by herself. Like, what were you thinking?
Well, it's the opening scene, so, a lot of programs start with an opening scene being kind of dramatic, so you're expecting something dramatic to happen, and so, it starts with something as simple as a traffic stop. I'll even say, one of the things that you do when you're training police officers is you talk about traffic stop and you say traffic stop, and everybody says, "Oh, it's just for traffic." But really, a traffic stop is an unknown stop. I mean, when you're stopping somebody in a car, if it's one person or two people or three people, you have no idea who you're stopping. And so there's a big question mark every single time you do that stop. And so in this case, there probably was a little bit more. She may have even recognized some of the people in the car before she did the stop. It's, wasn't really completely made clear. It was only made clear when she got up to the car and started, talking to them that she recognized the driver. But yeah, the traffic stop is an unknown stop. It's one of the most dangerous things police officers do. And I think the big thing too is that when you're looking at a traffic stop, from somebody else who's, if you're not in law enforcement, you haven't done police work, when you walk up to a car, your perspective is unknown. It's, is there danger here? Do I have to be paying closer attention to who's in the car and what's going on? Whereas when you're sitting in the car and you're being stopped, and you don't see yourself as a threat to anybody, you're, it's, you don't sense too, because they gave you some clues of the people in the car when they made the stop. There was some things in there they added in that kind of added a couple layers of, like, hey, there's more going on here than just a stop.
Yeah. So yeah, once you get up to that window, you really don't know what you have. And there's been a lot of officers who've been shot in exactly this situation. And so, I mean, obviously, you're going to do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of car stops. Thankfully, most of them don't amount to violence, but you're always living with the possibility, right? There's always that opportunity. And, if they depicted a show where police officers were using the best officer safety, it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be very interesting because you could head off a lot of this by using really good officers. We in law enforcement we call it officer safety, just using good tactics and putting yourself in a situation where the person, even if they had the intention of wanting to hurt you, it puts them in a situation where it's difficult for them to do that successfully. And maybe that person in the car is doing a little mental calculation like, okay, I have a warrant out for my arrest. I want to get away from this person. And they're looking for the opportunity to do that. And if they don't have that opportunity, they may just give up and they'd be like, all right, you got me. But if you open the door for them to do that, then they're like, you know what, maybe I got a shot here. So you always want to keep that door closed, right? You don't want them to have an opportunity to get, to get one over on you, to get the drop on you, whatever the case may be. And but again, like that show would not be fun to watch. Like you wanna watch a show where things are happening, and obviously there has to be this emotional, trauma that occurs that connects the people in the show, and obviously this is, the driving storyline for season 1. So the murder of Officer Delgado. So but yeah, I mean, obviously she's, as you're watching this and, it's for me, it's hard to watch. Like or watch, when you watch one of the dashboard cameras of a police officer who gets injured or killed on the line of duty. Like we saw those when you're, in the academy or maybe like in briefing training or like, hey, just remember, don't do this. Well, and you're watching it happen and it's going to happen. And you just got this sick feeling in your stomach to see that this isn't when you're watching those, it's not a character in a show. It's like a real person. And you also recognize that that could be you, under a different maybe in the same set of circumstances. So, you're just when I'm watching this, I don't know if you had the same feeling, Omar, but you're just like, "Oh, no." You're like, "Oh, no, please don't be standing, out in the street right in front of the window and you're talking to the person and then she's, requesting, she's telling them to come out of the car and she's requesting another officer to follow her up to come over and help her. And when you have multiple people in the cars, obviously, things they get more complicated, right? When you're dealing with one person, that's you're one on one, but now you got, possibly two, maybe three on one, whatever the case is. So when she was doing that, one of the red flags that I was picking up on was, obviously you have this girl in the front seat and there's probably a medical issue here. You got that happening. So she has to figure out what's going on with this person. Is she there voluntarily or not? But then when she's talking to them, they start getting really argumentative. And, as a police officer, right, that's somebody maybe they're trying to buy time. They're trying to think, what are we going to do right now? So that for me was a huge red flag when you're talking to somebody and they're obviously, it's not, not every time you talk to somebody, they're like 100% compliant, but in that scenario, I think if you're an officer in that situation, you have to recognize that if this person is arguing about coming out of the car, then you got a problem.
You're wondering what's going on. And I would just add in too, along the same lines is, when you're going to any call as a police officer, not just a traffic stop, but any call, you're really, and I'll put it in these terms, you're mitigating risk. And you're looking at a scene and you're saying, I want to make this place, wherever it is, if it's a car stop, if it's in front of somebody's house, I want to make it as safe as it can be so that the officer or me or whoever is there can do their job. And so you're always going with this mindset of, mitigating risk and looking at threat. And a lot of times when people are on the other side of that, when they're seeing the officer show up and they're kind of, this scene is safe enough for me. Now I can start doing my other job, which is investigating. What am I looking for? Why am I here? I stopped this person. I want to ask some questions. But like you said, when they start arguing with her when she does the stop, probably something should be going on like, "Hey, why am I getting all this argumentation? Why are they not cooperating?" And, that scene doesn't come to a place where you can completely feel comfortable and just continue to work. You're wondering, threat is still dangling around, like,
Mm.
I gotta kinda put it to rest, but I don't feel comfortable yet. And so that's something you're always kind of going back and forth with. Sometimes you move forward anyway, but sometimes you're moving forward with more risk if you choose to do that.
Yeah, I always told my trainees that if you find yourself in a situation that you're like your spidey senses are tingling and you're thinking, "Okay, I'm heading down a road that's not great." Like I've made like she's made contact with this car. She's talking to people in the car and she's realizing, "Okay, there's more going on here than perhaps I was prepared for." I always tell my trainees that it's okay for you to back off and call for help and then say, "Just wait in the car, I'll be right back." And just hang back by the car and just wait for help because, one of the I had little sayings that I would say all the time to my trainees and, I'd say, "Are we you need to make yourself we gotta be safe right now, right now. Like right now, are we safe? If we're not safe, then we need to do something different. So don't double down." And the other thing I would say, don't double down on a bad call.
Mhm.
If you made a bad call, you're standing next to this car, you're talking to these people, they're being argumentative, you're realizing, okay, this guy look like he might be a gang member. I know the other guy's on probation, has gang background, or whatever the case may be, because she recognized him. And you're like, okay, I'm a little over my head right now. This is not about my ego. I don't have to win this argument with these guys. I'm just gonna wait and we're gonna get these guys out of the car in a safe way. Now, again, that doesn't make maybe great TV, but yeah, I mean, it's and another thing too is, like you said, when people are dealing with the police and that police officer comes in and maybe you think like their tone is it's a little intense or whatever, because that police officer doesn't know who you are. And then usually things kind of calm down maybe, and that police officer kind of when they realize he or she realizes that you're not a threat, then things kind of calm down and they're talking to you in a way that maybe that you would expect, right? If because
Mhm.
you're not a threat, they don't know that.
Mm.
Like that's that's kind of the world that, police officers live in, and I was actually I listened to a interview with Ice Cube, who, was WA and obviously, had a difficult relationship with LAPD growing up in South Central LA, and but now he has kids, he's our age, or, he's in his 50s, late 50s, I think. And he was talking about his experiences with law enforcement, and he said, he goes, "Law enforcement, they have to win every encounter so they can go home." was really interesting that he said that because he recognizes that these are people just like him that wanna get home to their families, and that's a true statement. But police officers have to, if there's a confrontation, they have to win. They have to win, and if you're always you're reacting to what someone else is doing, your reaction time is gonna be a little bit slower than what they're doing. You're kinda playing catch up. So it's stressful, and I think most people don't really get that unless they've done a ride along or something like that. I think everybody should, if they can, do a ride along with their local law enforcement and get a better feel for kinda what their local law enforcement's doing. Okay, so at the end of this scene, she's shot, she's bleeding out on the street, and I felt like this was pretty realistic. Nobody goes to help her. They pull out their phones and they're just recording her as she's bleeding out in the street, and yeah, that was tragic.
Yeah. I think anybody that's doing the job now, if obviously something horrible like that would happen, that somebody would, step forward. And I mean, I believe that. I believe that in a time like that, somebody that's around would step up and do something. If it's just calling 911 and relaying information, and then maybe somebody else who feels like they've got some experience or something, they can go in and help some officer who's been injured. And you've seen it from time to time where people step in and help an officer make an arrest or somebody
Yeah,
who's been
I hope
injured.
so.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. But, I think every police officer would like to think, every law enforcement officer would like to think that somebody would step in and give them a hand if they were unable to help themselves. And that just goes back to what we were talking earlier, is that even in that situation, now you've got an officer who's injured. It goes back to that whole trying to make that environment safe for them so they can do their job. And if it's not safe for them, you know, then now they can't even finish the traffic stop. And now they're in a situation where they're, seriously injured or,
Yeah,
back who just kept staring at the officer. I mean, if you really kind of look, they didn't even turn and face away. They were like locked on him the entire time the officer was up starting the traffic stop. So they gave some pretty good clues that something was off and that
yeah,
environment wasn't safe, completed, operated. And that's when you mentioned, talking about some help, getting some backup there, changing that
yeah,
environment to make it safer. And and then of course, the shooting happens and that's a whole nother, I mean, that discussion of, people filming and not stepping up to help. But, a lot of times people haven't seen that kind of trauma in front of them before. So, maybe some of them were afraid or, unsure about what to do.
yeah, yeah, and her wound was, in her neck, and I kind of feel like they made it look like there was really nothing that could be done. I mean, that she was gonna bleed
Yeah.
out there, but anyway, yeah, you would hope that people in that situation, I do feel like people tend to record and not help as much as they should. So if
Mhm.
it would it would be nice, and that, but again, like when I was out there, I wasn't expecting anyone to help me. I just assumed I was on my own, and then therefore that's how I operated in a way that I wasn't getting caught out in a situation where
Right.
that I couldn't manage by myself. And if I couldn't manage it, then I was looking for, like you said, how do we mitigate that risk? How do we manage that?
Mhm.
Okay, let's go on to scene 2. So this is Officer Alex Diaz's first day. He arrives at the station house where training officer Tracy Harmon. She's in the locker room gathering her thoughts, and they meet briefly before Lieutenant Bishop, Aunt Becky, interrupts to brief them on Cortez and Maniac. Maniac is the gang guy, the gangbanger who shot Delgado. The young female passenger remains unidentified, but is now suspected to be a human trafficking victim. Bishop offers to reassign Diaz to Officer Matthew Rowland because we find out later that there's a connection between Delgado and Harmon, but Harmon declines, choosing to train him herself. Harmon kicks off the day by giving Diaz a symbolic get out of jail free card. This was interesting. 'Cause I first saw it, I'm like, "I'm not quite sure what she's doing." And taking him over for coffee, and over their conversation, they discussed Diaz's time at the academy, his family. Harmon tests him with the infamous, "Where are we? I got shot" question. Predictably, like all trainees, he blows it, but I guess not severely enough to lose his get out of jail free card. Before they can discuss it further, they're dispatched to a 273-5 call, which is a domestic violence or domestic disturbance call, and they take off. So, like, so anyway, that scene, it cracked me up because I had a very similar experience with my training officer. So, starting off with Harmon's in the locker room, they you see her, she's got her bare back, or she's, you can see her shoulders. She's got a big old scar on her back. So that obviously there's a reason why they did that. So there's going to be some kind of backstory probably about how she got that scar. And then there's the first day. So every police officer has their first day. Was your first day memorable, Omar, as a rookie when you went out to patrol training?
I would say it was, it's a big change. That would be one of the things I'd just highlight is that you go from basically a controlled environment being at the police academy where your day starts at a certain time, ends at a certain time. You know what your schedule is throughout the day. You know what classes you're going to be taking. You know if you're doing physical training. You know who your instructors are going to be, to an environment where now you're in a new building, a lot of unfamiliar faces, unless you saw them at the police academy. And it's like going to a whole new job in a way. The building is new, the facility is new, and you might see a familiar face or two, maybe a classmate or two that you had in the academy, but it's like you're starting a new job, and a new job where, you know, you don't have an idea of how all the pieces work together yet. You've kind of have all the parts and pieces, but you need to go into that field training program so you can put all that stuff together, and make it work so that you can do, the job.
Yeah, you've already invested 6 months at the academy, right? And so now you're going to this is it. Like, it doesn't matter what you did at the academy, I mean, provided you passed, obviously. But everything after that is kind of like everything before that, that first day in the patrol car with your training officer, like, none of that really matters in terms of if you were, like, number 1 in your academy class, nobody cares, right? She even asked him, like, where were you in your academy class? He was, like, number 2 out of 3. I was in an academy class of we had hundreds. It was at Rio Hondo, and we had hundreds, or more than 100, I think. I forget what it was. And, like, well, as long as you weren't last, if you're in the middle, that's fine. But when you get in that patrol car, now you have to prove that you can do the job, because if you can't do it, you're out of a job. It's over, right? I remember one of the guys from my academy class, when I was walking in, he was on day shift, I was on night shift on the same side of the week. So I was walking in when he was walking out, and he was carrying his bag and all his stuff, and he was crying. And I'm like, "Dude, what's up?" And he's like, "I got fired." Like, and it wasn't, and maybe he was only a handful of weeks into training, and for some reason, I didn't talk to him about it, but the department let him go. And, you know, he'd already been in the academy for 6 months, like he and the department's already paid for that, right? So they have an investment in you. But yeah, if you don't make patrol training, it's over, and it's difficult. I don't know about you, like, I started when I was 30, and I had a wife, a kid, and actually my second child was born when I was in the academy. So for me, it was like failure was not an option. Like, I have to do whatever I have to do to get through this evolution of
Sure.
training, and there's a huge weight. There's a huge weight on you, right? And
Yeah,
everybody's judging you
yeah.
when you walk through that door.
Yeah, you're constantly under the microscope. I mean, when you're at the academy, there's a staff that does nothing but pay attention to everything you do. Every test you take, how you march, how you organize your uniform, how you're prepared for whatever may be going on during that training day, and everything's looked at and everything's evaluated. It's a little bit of a pressure cooker. You're You're under the eye the entire time. But all of it is meant to, in some way, in some fashion, prepare you for actually going out and doing police work in the street, doing police work out in the community. And so they're giving you these, like I said before, they're giving you these pieces and these parts, and the FTO is going to tell you kind of where to put them and start to help you like focus in on certain things. And some of it, like everybody that leaves the academy thinks, "Oh man, they made us practice all this other stuff, and I really didn't use it." Like, they do a lot of marching. When you're in patrol, you don't do a lot of marching. But when you're
I
in
do
the
a lot of march.
you don't do a lot of marching, right? But when you're at the academy, you do a lot of marching. So, it's one of those things when you get out and start doing police work, you're like, "Man, we did a lot of marching," kind of a thing. And you just now out working in the field with your field training officer, you don't do any. So you get some of that, like, why did we spend all that time? And there's reasoning behind it, teamwork and paying attention and following instructions and attention to detail. So there's a lot of parts in there that are done, for those reasons versus just the actual marching itself. And so
Yeah,
and you don't really see that until later anyway. They'll be tasked where they'll give you to look for objects on the ground to focus on how to find evidence on the ground. So you'll be out maybe at the range picking up brass with your flashlight, and you're thinking, I'm just picking up brass. But what you're doing actually is you're paying attention to detail. You're looking for those casings that may be on the ground or small objects that may be on the ground in a limited light, location where you've got to use your light. And if you don't, you're going to miss something. So you get really good because they'll go around and they'll find those ones you missed, and then there'll be some consequences for it, just like in
is
patrol.
that why they did that? I thought they were just messing with me.
Right. They're making you
That
the
actually,
attention to detail. Yeah.
I had no idea. I now actually appreciate that. I was like, why do I gotta pick up brass in the dark with a flashlight? Okay, so yeah, so there's some things happening here. Like when you're a trainee, you gotta check out the patrol car. You gotta search it, make sure there's like, somebody didn't stash drugs in the back or something, whatever. But you kind of have to look. You gotta look in the make sure it's gassed up. You gotta make sure your rifle or your shotgun's patrol ready. All that stuff has got be ready to go. He says squad's ready, like a squad car. Do you guys ever call your patrol cars squad cars in Long Beach?
No, we didn't. We
No,
called them, they were
we call
units.
them units.
Units. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a squad car is a total East Coast,
Yeah.
thing. It's not anything that I've ever heard, at least in Southern California. You always talk about your patrol car as a unit. Anyway, okay, so he says the squad's ready. There's a couple little details. So they do when he gets does he get on the radio and say we're on call? Is that
Uh,
when they go 10-8?
oh, before he goes 10-8 or when they're doing they did that briefing outside, and
Yeah, yeah. So that's right. So they did the briefing out. Do you guys ever do briefing in the parking lot?
yeah, the only time a briefing would occur in the parking lot is if you're preparing to actually go deploy somewhere or go do something. The
Right.
parking lot is not a place.
You guys are like getting set up to go serve a search warrant or something like that, right?
Right.
Like it's
A
something more
search
specific. Yeah.
warrant, or they're gonna put a squad together to go and prepare itself to be involved in some kind of potential protest. Generally, you're not doing a watch briefing out in the parking lot. You're doing it in the briefing room so they can, show you videos or provide you information about, what's going on during the day. Maybe there's some bulletins, some safety bulletins that need to go out. So all that intelligence that would be helpful for you to
Mhm.
start your watch, whatever time that would be. And it's best done inside the building, usually in a
Yeah.
squad, yeah, in a briefing room.
Yeah, you're like almost in a classroom. It's like most police shows, they're sitting, they're all facing the podium and the sergeant's up there, or maybe the lieutenant. Usually the sergeant is talking about stuff that's going on in the city that you need to know about, maybe something that happened in the previous shift, etc. So yeah, letting you or a lot of times they'll have, people with active warrants, there'll be a book up there so you can look at it and so you kind of keep an eye out for those people, things like that. So, yeah, so when we would go when we're in the patrol car and we're going out and we're gonna be active for service, we would get on the radio and say 10-8, say your unit number 10-8. 10-8 is a 10 is a radio code, means, we're available for service. in the show, they say "on call," which obviously is the name of the show, so they had to get that in there somehow. Aunt Becky is dropping MFers when she's talking about, which again, it cracks me up. I'm like, "Aunt Becky, that's potty mouth. I can't believe you're saying that." The TO is asking Diaz if his belt is shined, his shoes are shined. Definitely one of those academy things. Is that did when you're a TO, would you look at your trainee to make sure all their stuff shine and looking good? Was that something I'm sure that's a TO,
Yeah,
training
field
officer thing.
yeah, field training officer would take a look at their appearance, make sure the uniform's in order, make sure they have their equipment. Usually, that is not a problem. They're coming right out of the academy. Their uniform is gonna look great. Their belt is gonna be, shined. So that's
It had to
usually
be
not.
shined for the academy.
What's that?
It had to be shined for the academy.
Yeah.
Like, that was the thing. Like, it had to be shined. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those are usually not the problems that you're gonna be dealing with as a field training officer. It's all the other stuff that goes along with, like I said, putting those parts together and getting them to do police work, and then making sense of it and how the system works, how, you kinda manage a patrol car as an officer,
Mhm.
the radio, listening to the radio. Everyone has different challenges. Some people, the organization in the car and trying to drive and listen to the radio and look for things. Others are just listening to the radio can be challenging. Getting to know the streets, which you mentioned earlier about knowing your location and knowing generally where you're at, and that's a must. That's a critical skill. If you don't know
Yeah.
where you're at, you can't ask for help. Um, and you can't go help somebody if you can't go find them if you don't know where to go. So knowing
Right.
locations is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, yeah, people don't really get a sense of how, like, we call it multitasking, which is kind of a misnomer. Like, human beings can't multitask. You can only do one thing at a time. But your task switching is really what you have to do. So when you're listening to that thing in your ear of a radio call, you really can't be listening to anything else. So, like, you kind of shut off the other ear and you're not listening to that. You can only listen to one thing. Or if you're talking, you can't be listening. So a lot of times we'd have that in our ear and you're talking to somebody and they just kind of gaze off into off into the ether, and they're listening to their radio. And I sometimes I'd be, talking to interviewing somebody, and I'd just say, hang on one sec. And I'd be like, listen to the radio, listen to the radio. I'm like, okay, go ahead. And sometimes I would tell a person, like, look, if you see me just staring off into the clouds, it's because I'm listening to the radio. It's not, I apologize. So yeah, it's a thing you have to learn, and a lot of people, and me included, when you first start out, like that and probably geography are the two things that people really struggle with.
Right.
I did. I don't have a good sense of direction anyway, so I would go on my days off and drive around the city and just try to learn. We had Thomas Guide maps. I'd have my map out. I'd be driving around the city trying, and I would, find a spot and I would try to, I'd say, okay, I'm gonna go to this address, and I would navigate myself there. And yeah, if there's a critical call and
Mhm.
somebody's like, I need help right now, you kind of want to know how to get there without having to break out the map and looking for the grid and stuff like that. So it's pretty stressful actually
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
trying to manage all these little things, driving the car,
Mhm. Yeah.
running a plate, like all the things that we saw in that first episode.
Yeah. They're driving around talking to each other, but there's a little bit of awareness going on about even when they're driving about what's going on around them, what's going on in front of
Mhm,
them, what's going on a little bit about what's going on behind them too. Listening to the
mhm.
radio, getting on the computer, being able to run a plate, still talking to your partner. When all those things are happening, it can be taxing for someone who just got out of the academy and they really didn't have to do any of those things I mean, they did little bits of them, but not all the same time and not when there's, you know,
Um,
real consequences behind them.
yeah,
And
you're on the job training. The consequence is that you get hurt or killed, or you get humiliated because you realize you blew it, and your
right.
training officer's looking, you're like, "What'd you just do
Well,
right there?"
yeah.
So, like, yeah, there's a lot of pressure, on yourself, and you're feeling it from all directions because you literally have, your boss, the person who's, like, evaluating you is sitting right there for an entire
Mhm,
12-hour shift,
mhm.
and they are evaluating every little pick and thing you do. So, yeah, it's crazy. She does the "Where are we right now?" which I think every training officer has done to their trainee. My training officer did it to me, and usually, well, usually he blow it, but he obviously does, and she doesn't berate him too much about it, which is good, but the lessons learned. My training officer, we're driving around, so you always start out in the passenger seat, that first few weeks, usually when you're in training. So I'm in the passenger seat, and we're going somewhere to a call. I forget what it was. Anyway, but my head was down. Oh, no, no, no. He was having me run things on the computer. So my head's down. I'm looking at the computer. We're driving all over the city, making turn, making turn, making turn. And he's like, "Where are we?" And so I pop my head up. I look around. I'm like, I got no idea. Like I wasn't paying attention. Usually when we're driving, because I'm kind of expecting this to happen, I'm looking at streets. I'm remember, okay, we're at this street. We're turning on this street. He got me looking down at the computer, which I felt like it was a little unfair, to be honest. I felt like I got set up. But yeah, like you that's a real thing, and I felt like this, big when he did that. I'm like, "Man, that really sucked."
Yeah.
Have you ever and
Yeah.
I've done it to my knee. Do you know that one?
So for me, we had in Long Beach, you have what they back in the day used to definitely have a what they call a street guide, and it had all the streets in the city, and it had their 100 blocks. So you could
Mhm.
locate addresses. If you had to find one that wasn't real common, you could look through your street guide. And as you're learning them, it's really tough when you're training. If you don't remember a street block, you got to take out your street guide. You're driving, you got to open it up. And so for me, what I ended up doing is, this was computers, they had computers, you could make a spreadsheet. I ended up making a spreadsheet. Basically, it was like an Excel spreadsheet, but I put in the 100 blocks for all the streets and I did them by division. So if it was West Division, I put in all West Division streets on this spreadsheet with their 100 blocks. And so I could basically, like, if I had to go look for a 100 block, I didn't have to take out my street guide. I had it on my visor. I'd look up in my visor. I could see the 100 block that it would tell me generally what, in between, side to side, wherever the street was at. And I wouldn't have to open up. So it made me much more efficient. And I even had like FTOs kind of saying, hey, you can use whatever training aid you want as long as it helps you get to where you got to go. Because it wasn't GPS. GPS has kind of really evolved over the last 15 years where you can pop out your phone and you can look at your phone and it'll take you right there. Doesn't always take you to the best route. So that's another part that GPS, is not precise. Like you might want to take a different route to get to a call other than where GPS might take you for safety reasons or, tactical reasons. And so, you got to take that with a grain of salt also that the GPS isn't perfect. But for me, I ended up just eliminating that as an issue for me by putting if I worked West Division, I put on my West Division card. If I worked East Division, I put on my East Division card and I could just look right where the street was at with the 100 block and yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had that option, like, the way our cities south of Long Beach, like, the cities I worked in, like, if we looked at the map, it looked like a plate of spaghetti.
Mhm.
Streets are doing this, it was all over the place. But, yeah, you make these little cheat sheets and stuff to kind of to help, help you out. Yeah, but that so that, 20 years ago, GPS was not a thing that people even had in their cars. So, navigation, GPS. Sometimes they had them built in the car, but obviously patrol cars aren't gonna have that. So the dispatcher would give you the page number and the grid in your
Mhm.
Thomas guide. You literally had a
Oh.
Thomas guide, and actually what I did is I photocopied all the Thomas guide pages that are for the city, and I taped them all together, and then I laminated and I folded it up, so that way I could just unfold this thing. I wouldn't have to flip through the book to go from page to page, so it was all contiguous, and I could see, "Okay, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go here," so it's and then I would but you can't look at it when you're driving, so in your head, you gotta, like, "Okay, I'm gonna go down this street, I'm gonna make a right, 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 then a left," or something. So you have to, like, kind of recall, and, when I did that in my 30s, I could actually remember more than, like, 2 things in a row. Like, now in my 50s, if I had to do that, I'd be in trouble. But, yeah, it was I lucked out. After I did that, I kinda crash and burn on that "Where are we right now?" question, and then shortly after, we went to a call for service in a particular neighborhood. We left that area, and then not too long later another officer on patrol with us put out that he needed help in that same area.
Mhm.
So we were just there, and so it was already kind of baked into my brain, and I was able to spin my training officer, like, I was driving, he goes, "Do you know where we're going?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." Freaking spun the car around, boop, 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 boop. I was, like, right there, and he was actually in a fight with somebody. We jumped out, handled it, and my training officer just like, "Dude, you nailed it. That's so great." So I lucked out. I lucked out of that situation. It was perfect timing for me. And, yeah, I'm so grateful because, oh my god, yeah, you hear your partner fighting with somebody on the radio, and adrenaline's through the roof, and you're like, "We gotta get there as fast as we can," and I was able to do it, did it safely, and thankfully, my training officer liked it, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else we're gonna say about this scene? Was there anything else that kinda jumped out at you? I feel like
Well, I will say
that was
just what
kinda
what you just mentioned right there just got me thinking is, when you had to go to that call, you hear your partner or somebody that you work with in your beat, a beat officer, and you hear the call go out and you've got to respond and you've got to find the location, you got to pick the best route, you're going to be rolling probably lights and siren. All that is going to, like you said, it's going to spike your adrenaline. And the crazy thing about that is that if your adrenaline starts to go too high, and this is something that, police officers do train for. If their heart rate starts to go up, if their adrenaline starts to go up, their ability to like process and think about things and make decisions becomes much more difficult. So the
Mhm,
training that you're going through when you had to go do that that was just one piece that helped you be a little bit better. So the next time you got that call, your heart rate doesn't go up as much. You can make better decisions. But all that
mhm,
takes, that's training that starts in the academy, but it's kind of an ongoing thing. And I think sometimes even in the shows, you get a little bit of that, but you don't really get the sense of what's going on inside that officer's brain. I mean, the actor tries to portray some of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe what happened to the trainee when they had a pursuit and maybe some of the things
right.
that were going on and why they made the decisions they made.
Yeah. Yeah, all those things, like you mentioned, are kind of you're getting inoculated to the stress, so
Yeah.
but yeah, you tend to get better at managing it, obviously, with more experience, but but, you know, after, even doing it for 20 years at the end of my career, you hear that call go out, your adrenaline is pumping, you're just, yeah, maybe a little bit better at managing, that stress. Okay, let's go on to scene 3. So upon arrival, they go into the house, they find the people involved in the domestic incident. Angry mother and her son, Ricky. Harmon quickly assesses that Ricky has assaulted his mother over the money for drugs. Things escalate when Harmon announces she's going to take Ricky to jail for the night. Sparking another heated argument, the mother eventually orders the officers to leave, but Harmon stays to question Ricky about Delgado. So this is she's thinking about Officer Delgado who was killed, and she's maybe hoping that this guy knows something about Maniac or the people involved. When Ricky responds with insults, Harmon retaliates verbally. Unbeknownst to her, Diaz's body camera is capturing the exchange. Complicating matters further, Diaz reports that he couldn't get a statement because the mother locked herself in the bathroom, and when they finally open the door, they have to kick the door in. They find her unresponsive with a needle in her arm. Just as they call for an ambulance, the mother regains consciousness. Kind of a little jump scare. Okay. So I thought this was interesting, because I think, again, like what people don't understand is you go there, you're thinking you're helping somebody, especially in a domestic situation, they may turn on you, right? If you're thinking, hey, this mom was assaulted by her son, she's still a mom. So she doesn't want her son getting arrested, obviously. But in this situation, I thought it was also interesting. So this is not a domestic violence. It's not a 273.5, which is in the California Penal Code, which is a felony battery of a domestic partner, but actually simple assault, right? So it's not. I actually had a call just like this, minus the needle hanging out of the mom's arm. But it was one of these situations. It was like a sibling. It was assault on sibling. They were adult siblings, and one of the question was, you know, this is this a a misdemeanor assault or is this a felony domestic violence? And it turned out, no, it's actually not. And so you can't arrest somebody for a misdemeanor not committed in your presence, which is something that's often not discussed in these cop shows. So in other words, the only way they could have done that is to get mom to sign a private person's arrest, right? In that scenario, does that sound about right, Omar?
Yes, yeah, I mean,
Is that when you if they called you out, if you're the sergeant and, "Hey, Sarge, can you come out?" Like, when you look at that situation, what would you be telling those guys?
well, the most important thing is what's their relationship, and sometimes you don't always get the straight story, and so that's the part that you kinda gotta dig into a little bit. If you're pretty confident that it's mother and son, then that establishes the relationship, and it can tell you, you know, what direction you're gonna go with what kind of crime. They're not like domestic partners or they're
No, they're
cohabitating
they're
unless.
not a romantic dating
Right, right,
relationship, which is what's actually required.
right.
So anyway, yeah, so mom kind of flips out on him when they realize it's like she's the one that calls, or maybe she didn't call the police, maybe it was the neighbors. But anyway, the police show up. Sometimes they call you and they don't want you to do anything. They just want you to like fix their problem. But the police, when we show up, the way we fix problems is with handcuffs and guns and stuff. Like, so that someone's gonna go to jail. Sometimes that's not what they were really hoping for.
Yeah, that's a good
What do
point.
you
You're like when you're saying, how do we solve problems? And when I would teach courses at the academy, that was one of a lot of times you get different discussions about it. Like, are police officers problem solvers? Do they just go there and enforce the law? Are they just law enforcers? And you can get a bunch of different opinions on that. I mean, I think law enforcement officers are problem solvers. They figure out
so
what's in front of them, and then they find the best solution for what they're allowed and required to do. And sometimes that's nothing. You just don't do anything. You just say, "This is a civil matter, not our problem. It's your problem. You're gonna have to." But if you're having a call and that call is leading towards arrest, and it looks like the only way to solve it is an arrest because the parties won't leave, or if you leave, they're going to go right back at it again, and you're going to get more violence. Sometimes you can get pushed into a corner where that decision is arrest. But ultimately, you got to kind of sift through all that and figure out what's the best way to go to help these people so they don't continue the violence. And if it is going to continue, then maybe arrest is the way to go, or it's just serious enough where you have to make an arrest.
right. Yeah, and so Diaz has got his body camera on, catches Harmon saying some things that probably, or perhaps violate their policies, procedures with regards to, how we talk to people. And so that's a real thing. Like, and I like the fact that like, when I started, there were no body cameras, and actually my first time as a patrol officer, there's no cameras on the dash of the patrol car. So that in the 20 years ago, they obviously, all departments do that now. But yeah, so she's saying something to this guy, and that she's trying to put the fear of God into him a little bit, so perhaps he won't do it again. But of course, that never works. You can't. It's somebody who's an addict, somebody's in an abusive relationship. Telling them that next time it's gonna be bad for them is not gonna be something that's gonna be helpful. It's not gonna stop them from doing it. And, sometimes, police officers, we say things like that because, you know, you want that person to stop, and, you know, maybe that wasn't the appropriate thing for her to say to him at that moment. But I understand kinda where that's coming from, right? She just say, "Hey, just knock it off. Or if I have to come back, you're going to jail," or whatever it was.
Right.
But anyway, I think we need to move on to the next scene.
Yeah.
We're reviewing a 30-minute show, and we're already 1 hour into the podcast. So let's move along, because especially there's some later scenes here that are a bit more juicy. All right, so scene
Ah,
4. Later, Harmon teaches Diaz how to run license plates. They stop a vehicle with an active warrant for driving on a suspended license. The driver admits to possessing a meth pipe, but insists there are no drugs in the car. After confirming the driver doesn't have a valid license, Harmon and Diaz search the vehicle. They find only the pipe and release the driver, but not before Diaz has him call his father to ask for help with his addiction. And really, I think this scene is there to give you a sense that, Diaz, he's a true believer, right? He wants to help people. And I mean, you kind of see the TO kind of smiling, kind of watching me like, oh, like I think she didn't think it was going to be effective, but I think she liked that he tried anyway.
Mhm,
And so that was cool. The funny thing is, what I kept thinking when I saw this, Omar, you remember when possessing a meth pipe was a crime? Remember that?
mhm. Yeah, 11,364, I think it was, health and safety code.
11364 of the health and safety code. But like now it's like it's a ticket, so it's not a big deal. They have the guy step on it and he calls his dad. So any thoughts, maybe a story or something that
Yeah, well, I
from
mean,
you?
I would just say this is another perspective comment is, when you get a lot of talk, especially from, those that view what officers do during the day, or they see little clips of an officer kind of, acting insensitive or maybe a little short or curt or mean even, maybe even mean, is that the perspective is, when an officer goes to these calls throughout a shift, whether it's a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, and they'll see some children that have been abused, they'll see some violence, maybe a stabbing, they'll see some domestic violence, they'll see if empathy comes out every single call where there's some serious um traumatic stuff going on, or even if it's not that serious but it's still somewhat difficult to handle, they're not going to be able to function. It's going to be very difficult for them to finish their shift because they're just going to be tapped out. So
Yeah.
they have to kind of, officers kind of have to protect a little bit of their empathy in a way. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to get through a shift. And I think that's what you see sometimes over the course of a long career is that, like this officer sitting in the car, she kind of appreciates that he's trying to help this guy. But she also knows that over the course of her career, she probably has to dial back some of the empathy. Trying to help people is doesn't always, work out, and putting that putting too much of that out there maybe would drain her emotionally, or she wouldn't be able to finish the shift because she'll lose a little bit of that, focus to do the job, and detract her from kind of focusing on her law enforcement responsibilities. So it's just another way to kind of look at that. I think that was one of the things that I saw when, you know, she liked it, but she
That's
grew, that it's kind of
you
a
can't do that.
yeah, you can't do it forever. It's
Yeah, it's like you can't sprint a marathon
right.
emotionally like that. And I think that's a great you made a great point, Omar. And another thing too is people need to be remembering that when a police officer shows up, maybe like you're calling because someone scratched your car or whatever, they're showing up and they may have just came from a call where they dealt with a sudden infant death, a baby who died overnight. You know what I mean? Like you don't know where they're coming from, like literally where they're just coming from, what that call did to them emotionally.
Mhm.
And you're like, and the person's like, I don't like your tone, like the way you're talking to me right now. And the police officer's like, I'm doing my best, like I'm so sorry, whatever. Or they're defensive because they just had to deal with something that 99% of human beings don't have to deal with,
Mhm.
you know, and maybe it's like how many dead people, like literally dead people does the average person ever see or smell?
Right.
Like how many times have you seen an abused child? Like how many times, I mean the average person, like for them, does the average person even see a dead person like on the street ever?
Mhm.
Like can you go through your entire life and never see that? Yeah, probably. Maybe you go to a funeral and they're in a coffin. I mean like what the average police officer sees in 1 year
Mhm.
is way more trauma than a person will ever experience in an entire lifetime, and we've done 20 years of that.
Mhm.
So, it's hard to I think for average people to really get that, and
They don't you don't feel it.
that's what we're looking
Yeah.
for.
And it's that critical incident. There's actually, I think, a study done where they said, how many critical incidents does a law enforcement officer experience during, I don't know, it was like a 20 or 25-year career. And the number was, I think it was in the hundreds, maybe even more, depending on where they worked. And then the average citizen may experience 1 or 2 in an entire lifetime. So when you talk about that kind of, emotionally for human beings, because they're human beings, police officers are human beings, that can definitely wear somebody down, and it's have to come up with a way to manage it, otherwise they can't do their job.
Yeah, and hopefully, you gotta learn a way to manage it in a healthy way, and a lot of officers, turn to things like alcohol to deal with those feelings, and we have, many too many officers who are committing suicide. I lost a friend to suicide that I worked with, and yeah, so the toll is real that the that
Mhm.
that you that that you take, and like, you're a brand new officer like Diaz, you don't even know that. Like, it's gonna be tough, it's gonna be stressful to I guess, but you really don't understand what that is until you're doing CPR on a baby. Like, you can't really wrap your brain around that until it actually happens. Okay, let's go to scene 5.
Mhm.
During scene 5, during their lunch break at Harmon's favorite spot, which it was like a food truck, like, out by the beach. That looks like a nice place. Harmon tells Diaz to write her up, to basically write a memo to the sergeant or the lieutenant saying that she heard her threatening Ricky. They are interrupted by a report of a green Mustang linked to Maniac. Unfortunately, they have to throw their delicious tacos in the garbage, which I've done that more than once, which is a
Mhm.
bummer. Ignoring the dispatch's suggested location, Harmon leads Diaz to an area that she knows, like, where the gang has kind of been expanding. So that's good. She's using her what she knows about the city. Moments later, they spot the Mustang, initiate a high speed pursuit, and it ends when the Mustang crashes on the interstate. Harmon stays with the injured driver while Diaz, disobeying her orders, chases the fleeing passenger Maniac, who obviously we know has no problem shooting a police officer, through an abandoned house. Despite his efforts, Maniac escapes. Well, man,
Yeah.
like, do you remember your first vehicle pursuit? Were you a trainee?
I was a trainee, and I remember driving down the alley, and I one of the things that just is is inside my head when I recall it, or try to recall it, was and they showed a little bit of it in the scene when they were driving down the alley, you saw some of the dust come up, but driving down an alley, first of all, if someone's driving at a high rate of speed, it kicks up so much dust, and everything that's in that alley goes up into the air. It's like a fog. I mean, it's very difficult to see. So, you're having to slow down because you can't see. You're basically driving through a dirt fog until you can get to the mouth of the alley where now you've got the street and then you can see and then you got to figure out, which direction they went. Um, and so, you know, part of it was just, the you get an adrenaline rush, things that I didn't expect, which was the dust in the alley. It all kind of takes processing like, okay, now I got to slow down, but this person's driving fast. I got to pay attention to who's out and about. Is there somebody in the alley? Is somebody walking across the alley? When I get to the mouth of the alley, is there a bike going by? I got to take my time getting out so I'm not, hitting a person or a car, even though the lights and siren are going. It's definitely an
It's intense.
overload. It's intense. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's an
intense.
overload. And it's
Yeah, I
they grab a little bit of that when they show the scene, but you get a little bit more of that. It definitely happened to the younger officer, the trainee later when the when the suspect vehicle crashes.
yeah, I was in a vehicle pursuit very early on in my training period. In fact, it might have been with my first training officer. Yeah, and it was very short, but whew, like, I remember, like, my heart, like, beating out of my chest, and we did a felony car stop, we ordered him out, which you practice in the academy, so, like, that whole thing, that felt pretty easy. We actually did quite a few practice,
Mhm.
felony car stops in the academy, But yeah, I mean, I was in the passenger seat, so I really wasn't doing anything except just kind of being along for the ride, but I remember thinking, like, "Wow, this is crazy." It was a lot of fun. I mean, you get into law enforcement for lots of reasons, and one of them probably is to chase a bad guy, which was always my favorite thing, whether it was on foot. I gotta say, chasing someone on foot, it was my favorite. I got into a couple foot pursuit as a training officer with my trainee, and it was so much fun. I can't even tell you. Like, when they would turn and run, I'm like, "Thank you." And we start chasing after them. So, yeah, so that all that happens. Pursuits are pretty dangerous. So would have Long Beach PD, would they have canceled that pursuit when that guy was driving on the, because she wasn't putting
Yeah.
out on the radio that
No. No.
speed, he's on the wrong
Yeah.
side of the road, like, all that information, that watch commander would the watch commander would have or she have kiboshed that pursuit?
Pursuits are very well regulated. I mean, even from state law perspective, all the way down to department policy. And there's really, every agency has their own rules. Some are a little tighter than others, depending on what agency it is. But going on the wrong side of the road, like on a freeway at a high rate of speed, it doesn't get any more dangerous than that. So
No, the
definitely.
liability is so crazy.
Oh, yeah, because you got somebody driving at the suspect vehicle, they're going at a freeway speed, and then you got that suspect vehicle driving basically head on. There's isn't really, that's it's dangerous as it gets. So, definitely something would have happened. I think, part of it is the whoever would be supervising that pursuit would have to know what's going on in order to make decisions on what they would do, whether they would cancel it or they would use other resources or, I mean, you are dealing with a potential homicide suspect of a police officer. So that would definitely factor in because, if that person escapes, are you looking at them committing another kind of crime like that, whether it's an officer or a person? So that would be a factor that would be considered to continue it or
Mhm.
not continue it. Definitely bringing in some other resources to oversee that pursuit so you could, kind of monitor what's going on and maybe
Right,
not
and
have.
they ended up getting the yeah, and they ended up getting the helicopter,
Oh, did they?
right? Yeah, didn't they? I think so.
I think when it crashed, I don't know if it was on scene yet. Maybe after it was.
Okay.
Yeah,
D
that whole
does
first
Long
part.
Beach does Long
Yeah.
Beach have a helicopter, or do they borrow, like, Huntington Beach's helicopter?
Long Beach has a helicopter. They had depending on what period of time you look at, they had a couple helicopters, they had one helicopter. It became, one of the things with those kinds of resources is it's very expensive. So they're always trying to balance the use of it and the expense of it.
Yeah.
The thing is LA is a huge county, so there's a lot of other resources to tap into. A Los Angeles sheriff, they have, a fleet of helicopters, and then some of the other agencies, in the area have probably a sharing, I think some of the South Bay have like a sharing deal, like they did in Orange County where they would use resources amongst various cities to
Yeah.
have that equipment. But, yeah, I think you would definitely it's definitely a serious deal, but I think one of the overriding factors would have been a homicide suspect of a law enforcement officer would have added another element in there that would have, you know
Yeah, true. I actually, I didn't really think about that. I was just thinking about, if they hit a car, I mean, the suspect's car hit a person just driving down the street minding their own business and killed them, it's gonna be on the police department really
Yeah,
allowing that pursuit to go ahead, and of course, she wasn't even telling the sergeant probably or the lieutenant who would be managing that remotely. So if that were to happen, then Harmon
mm,
would be in big trouble because it's like that's your job is to, let us know,
right,
what's going on, what are the conditions, what's happening, and she didn't do that. So luckily nobody but the driver was injured. Okay, so they get in the pursuit, they crash, and the Diaz does not stay with his training officer. He runs after Maniac, even though Harmon's like, "Do not do that." She's like, "Stay." He takes off,
right,
which is a cardinal sin. You do not well, number 1, you don't get into a foot pursuit by yourself in an area where you don't know where you're going, and you certainly don't disobey a direct order from your TO.
right,
So, that's pretty serious.
yeah,
Um, but, trainees do dumb stuff because they don't know what they're doing. So to some degree, I kind of felt like that could happen, like that didn't when I was watching that on the show, like that didn't blow my mind. I was like really, I was like, no, don't go, don't change. And he did it anyway, which of course, again, makes for a good episode.
Right. Yeah,
But
right. Yeah. Yeah, I would
you
say,
know,
if I was a training officer in that situation, obviously not following your field training officer's instruction is a pretty serious action, especially when you're brand new. If you're a brand new
and that was
trainee,
his first day.
yeah. I
It's his first
mean,
day of training.
he, you know, he
Pretty
that
busy.
he feels that confident where he could chase after a murder suspect, of a law enforcement officer, and he can't even sit in the car by himself and drive, answer the radio, run a plate, go code 3. He can't do any of those things by himself because he's still learning the job because it's his first day. To feel that confident that he could chase after, a murder suspect who had killed a law enforcement officer and go on foot pursuit by himself. He didn't even get the answer right about where you at? Where are you at? Where we're drinking coffee, and he's gonna be chasing after somebody. I mean, it makes great TV, that part, but the discussion after that would be a pretty serious discussion because,
Yeah.
I told you to
Yeah, I
stay,
mean,
you
that
didn't
that
stay, and I'm responsible for you. That FTO is responsible for that trainee,
yeah.
and if you're not gonna listen to me, then we have some serious issues,
Yeah, and I mean, they have that discussion in the next scene. If I was the training officer, that discussion would probably be back at the station with the sergeant talking about what happened, and that would be documented, and that trainee would know that if that I mean, I guess it would depend again, you know, the out like, if nobody got hurt, that's one thing, but if there was some liability that was created by someone getting hurt or something like that, then I think that's a different discussion, but for sure, that discussion would be, "Hey, if that ever happens again, you're gone. That like, you can never do that." But the next scene, that's what happens. So back at the scene, back at the car crash, so the end of that the previous scene, so Harmon finds him, at the abandoned home. Luckily, he was not dead, and she brings him back to the crash scene, and there, she reprimands him for ignoring her orders. She pulls him aside and then discusses what Sergeant Lastman said to him earlier. So in the very first scene when she comes out to the show, when she comes out to the parking lot, he's chatting with Sergeant Lastman, Eric LaSalle's character. And like when she comes out and they all make eye contact, they all kind of like split up, like they're obviously talking about her. So she says, what were you guys talking about? And then Diaz reveals that Lastman mentioned that Delgado was one of Harmon's former trainees, which Harmon says, yes, that's true. And then the episode concludes with Diaz handing back his get out of jail free card as they are dispatched to another call, and they still have a half a shift to go. So that
Yeah.
was all that happened in a 6-hour shift, which is kind of amazing. But yeah, I mean, as a trainee, you have good days and bad days. And I remember as a trainee, I would have a great day and I would show up to work next day thinking, "Man, I just crushed yesterday. I did such a good job." And then I would do something dumb or I'd make a mistake and I'd be like, "Oh man, I can't believe I did that." But I had a really good training officer. Actually, he wasn't my training officer, but he was on my shift. And he said, "Clay," he goes, "You need to come to work with a clean plate." He goes, "When you're working your shift as a trainee, you're gonna make mistakes. It's like he's piling garbage on your plate." He didn't say garbage, he used another word for a brown organic matter. He goes, You're gonna pile that up on your plate." And he goes, when you come back to the next day, you gotta scrape that off and you gotta start with a clean plate." He goes, "If you come back with that plate still full of what happened yesterday, you're just get it's gonna build and build, and finally you're just gonna be crushed under the weight of that." And that was one of the best bits of advice that he gave me, and I use that actually with my trainees. But yeah,
Yeah.
you make mistakes, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
What did you tell your trainees?
I was always um, looking at their training as like I mentioned earlier, like these are the things you've got to do. You've got to come up with problems. I'm going to help you find some of those solutions, but ultimately my goal is to get you to think of your own solutions so that when I'm no longer here, you can make all those good choices for your benefit and for everyone that's working around you, including me, because I could be working around you. And so I just tried to lay it out like, hey, we're just going to go step by step, kind of brick by brick, and we're going to build up some of your foundational experience so you can function as a police officer or deputy sheriff, whatever the case may be, out in the field by yourself. And
Yeah, a
so that
competent solo patrol officer.
right. So that was the goal. That's the way I always framed it. And then later as a supervisor, what you mentioned, the way what you were describing is I would, as a supervisor, and it just reminded me of that when you said that, is every now and then during briefings when we would, because the supervisors, the sergeants would lead briefings, and it wasn't the lieutenant, it was usually the sergeants or group of sergeants. I always looked for things that would create mindset and inspiration. So if you're trying to create a mindset going out into patrol, what would that mindset be so that they can be safe and so they can do their job and they can do it so that they're doing the right things for policy and all that. So people aren't getting in trouble. And then the other was just inspiration. Like, why do we come out here and do this every day? Where does our motivation come from to deal with some of these horrible things that happen on a daily basis? And sometimes it's just humor. You try to find some humor in something and you have a few laughs during briefing and everybody goes out a little bit lighter because you had a few laughs. And sometimes it's just you put somebody on the screen, maybe it was a YouTube video or something inspirational that gets people thinking, "Hey, this is why I do it," or that's why they do it. Maybe there's a reason why I do it. And then they start thinking about that a little bit and they go out thinking, they've got a purpose when they're going out and doing police work and that the purpose is a little it's a little higher purpose, whatever that may be, and just getting them to think about that. So, those are a couple of the things, whether it was a supervisor or whether I was training, um, uh, trying to just create that environment where people would do well and be productive and
Yeah.
get the job done.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And, when you're a training officer, your relationship with that trainee is really important and it doesn't and you're really kind of creating the next generation of police officers or deputy sheriffs. And it's and I think training officers they take it very seriously. Everyone that I've ever worked with, and I did, and you want your trainee to be successful. You want them to be safe. And, the idea that your trainee, you know, got themselves in a situation, clearly the officer's safety was all wrong in that scenario, and it got her killed, and she says this, I think in this episode, she says, "I keep wondering, what could I have done better for her? What else could I have done?" And yeah, that is really true. That's exactly what a trainer would say,
Right.
training officer would say if that were to happen to their trainee, and really feel guilty and just second guess. What could you have done? I think that was really really honest as well, and obviously that's for her. That's her mission is to one get the guy who killed this person, right? Her trainee to Delgado. And the number 2 is that she doesn't make that mistake with Diaz. So I think
Mhm.
that's kinda like where we're going with this story,
Mhm.
because especially when he runs off by herself, I mean, she's gotta be having
Mhm.
like you're doing the thing that you can't do. And if you do it, you're gonna get hurt or killed, and I'm gonna feel horrible if that were to happen. So I definitely got that feeling, and that was I think well written first episode, the pilot,
Yeah,
and I
and it
liked
kinda
it.
goes back to that
So
purpose part. The purpose part for her is like, maybe it's hinting at what her purpose is, even though she has this trainee where something awful happened, but now she's got another trainee. Her purpose hasn't gone away, right? So she's maybe struggling with it a little bit, like, I still can train this person and I still have a reason to do it. And so maybe that's, more of where the story is going and kind of the series is kinda maybe that's one of the
yeah.
areas it'll evolve into. Is that defining her purpose as she continues to train.
If I were her, if I was that trainer and that happened to me and I had a new trainee in my car, I'd be doing everything I could do to keep that from ever happening again. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that's where this is going. Okay, well, that is episode 1, the pilot of On Call, and we'll be coming back with kind of the same format for each of these. It will be sharing our personal experiences and our stories. And I hope if you're watching this, if you're somebody who, finds these kinds of stories interesting, the police stories, hopefully we kind of give you a little bit different, you know, perspective on this. And if you're watching this and you're like us, you're law enforcement and for some weird reason you like to watch shows about law enforcement because you don't get enough of it in your day to day, hopefully you're kind of hearing what we're saying and maybe you're nodding your head and if you are, I mean, Omar, I would now that we're retired, we're very thankful for you protecting us and doing the things that not a lot of people can do. It's not an easy job, so thank you for that. And we'll look forward to episode 2 and we'll talk about it again.
All right. Sounds
All
good.
right, Omar. Sounds good. All right, partner. We'll get back on this next week. Everybody have a great week. Be safe, especially those in patrol. And we're on call. This is the official, unofficial podcast of the Amazon On Call. All right, everybody, have a great week. Be safe, and we'll see you next time.